Colleen Taylor with TechCrunch TV, sitting here at Redfin San Francisco headquarters with Redfin CEO Glenn Kelman and investor from Greylock, James Slavet. So the big news today is the $50 million new fundraise. So just to get started, Glenn, can you give me the pitch in case I forgot? What is Redfin?
So Redfin is a technology-powered real estate brokerage. The idea is to reinvent the way people buy and sell homes, not just the initial search on a website, but how you get into the property, how you buy the property. We have real estate agents who work for us, and we couple that with this technology to make the whole process insanely great.
Okay, and explain to me, you're the investor here, or one of the investors. There are a couple new investors in this round. Talk to me about this round. Why 50 million? You know, why did you reinvest here at Redfin in such big amount of money?
So, so the Tiger Global and T. Rowe Price are the two lead investors on the round, and then Greylock and other existing investors also participated as part of the financing. So I think the reason, Glenn and the team are focused on building a very big, kind of independent, lasting company, and so this financing is really kind of one step on the journey. I see Redfin as part of a broader trend, kind of a movement that we call E to E, which really stands for end to end. So companies that are actually looking to transform the entire customer experience from beginning to end. So it's companies like Uber, companies like Airbnb, companies like Redfin are building more than just like a front-end website or mobile application, but delivering the entire customer experience. And so if you have that ambition to build an end-to-end company, it requires capital, to hire people, to build product, and to deliver the right kind of experience.
And give me the numbers on where Redfin's at right now. What's the staff figures like? Can you give me any revenue? Where are you at?
Well, more than $100 million revenue run rate. More than 500 employees. It's a profitable business. So this is a company that I think was hard to scale initially, just because if you're a real estate broker, you come into town, you don't have enough agents to cover the territory, you don't know any customers, and it's a very local relationship-driven business. But as you achieve scale, not only do you have more information on your website, but you also have better local service. So we've actually seen this inflection point where as we've taken share in a market, we grow faster, not slower. So that's what's really excited investors, is that a brokerage is hard to cold start, but once it gets going, and once you've built all this technology to really make the entire experience good, you've got a very large market. $50 billion are paid to real estate agents every year in fees, and everyone thinks this is a market where technology and a real focus on the customer can make it better.
Now, when you get to this point and you're profitable, you're large, and this is Series F funding, you've had other rounds, how do you make that decision to stay private and take on more, personal or private investors versus going public? I'd imagine you could hold an IPO now. What's the strategy?
Well, I still think we want to invest in the business, and we still want to experiment. If we felt like we had everything figured out, we probably would have gone public, but because we just want to preserve this ability to really make deep investments, not just in the current business, but in new businesses, we felt like we could raise capital from public company investors, make whatever moves we wanted to make with that money, but still take big chances. We're not necessarily beholden to quarter-to-quarter earnings. Now, that said, I think James was right that this is a company that is going to be an independent public company at some point. So I'm not discounting that for the future. I just think that today we still wanted to be able to make investments that were risky.
There's a great moment I'm recalling when I was watching Glenn actually present this company story to investors just a couple months ago, and one of the investors asked, "So tell me, if this isn't a public company, who is the company that is likely to buy you?" And Glenn said, "We don't have a logical acquirer. There is no logical acquirer." And there was sort of like this pause, and then Glenn smiled. And that is actually, if you look at this kind of business, this kind of end-to-end business, if you look at it through the investor lens of like, who is the logical buyer, this is not, it's sort of the antithesis of Instagram or YouTube, which are very exciting investments. But this is not a company that's going to get bought by Facebook or Google. this is a company that's on a march, to build a business that can be worth, many, many billions of dollars, but, over a longer period of time.
And how do you look at the competitive landscape? When people think real estate websites, they think Redfin and they think Trulia, they think Zillow. There are other players out there. What's the differentiating factor here between these companies?
Yeah. So we work with Zillow, we embed their estimates, but we also compete with them for traffic. The difference is that we've launched one market at a time, and we have data from the local multiple listing service that real estate agents use, so we have about 20% more listings. But the more fundamental difference is that they're a media business whose customer is a traditional real estate agent, so that agent has paid to be placed next to a listing, whereas we're really trying to compete with the traditional agent. We think there's a better way to buy and sell homes, not just in the initial search, but the whole friggin' process could be so much better if we invested in technology, if we put the customer first. So in some ways that made the business scale more slowly. We didn't launch nationwide. We just went to one market and then another because we had to hire these local agents. But it's such a larger opportunity. If you look at the history of really large-scale businesses, businesses that are worth tens of billions of dollars rather than a few $billion, you have to do something fundamentally great for the customer. You have to reinvent the whole experience and not just be an internet front end for business as usual. So our hope is that we can be more disruptive, that it may take more time, but we think it can be much more valuable and it's more fun.
And the trend I'm seeing, like the bigger picture on this, is I'm seeing a kind of a generation of entrepreneurs who are inspired by people like Steve Jobs, people like Jeff Bezos, people like Richard Branson, more recently Elon Musk, who are building kind of real world companies that are delivering either products or services into the real world, but powered by software. And it's sort of this fusion of software on the front end and people on the back end. So again, when we look at Redfin, Uber, Airbnb, others, this trend is also going to play out across other categories of services. So you'll see it impact the world of education. You'll see it impact healthcare. You'll see it impact a number of other sectors over time.
Now, one thing that you've said a couple times is that Redfin didn't have blockbuster growth in the early days. It was really sort of very measured in its expansion. Was there a moment as an investor from the earlier days that there was pressure from you guys, on the investor side to kind of amp it up, and then Glenn, you had to push back a little bit? Like what has that process been like as you've seen other companies grow really quickly?
I should answer that because I think James has been so supportive and it's hard for him to say that. We've grown 50 to 100% every year. This is a business that took share, rain or shine in the market, we grew. But we've never grown 300 or 400%, and James has always shared our obsession with the customer experience. When we start growing 80 or 90% year over year, we worry, are we really serving every single customer well? And that's something that's hard to do. You've got to show up on time for every tour, you've got to negotiate hard on every offer, you've got to sell every property you commit to sell, and it's a crazy market. So I think focusing on the customer and making sure the experience was right and saying 50 to 100% is just fine with us has really served us well. When we talk to public company investors, it was such a different world than some of the private investors. I think James was exceptional when we were raising venture capital because he had the patience to see a business that could really be a large-scale business. But the public company investors, that's their meat and drink. That's what they're really looking for. They always worry that an internet company had 300% growth for a few years while the venture investors were in, but that it's played out by the time it reaches the public markets. And here they see a business that still only has 2 or 3% share, but is at that $100 million revenue run rate. So they see an opportunity that can get larger and larger and larger.
And well, I'd like to be seen as someone who has had tremendous patience.
You did.
I will also say that 4 years ago, literally 4 years ago, November of 2009, was the last time that we were on video talking with TechCrunch. It was Michael Arrington sitting here. He offered us a beer. It was the afternoon, and I sat between this very odd ping pong match, back and forth, the two of you talking. It was very entertaining. But that was 4 years ago, and the business has grown, 6 or 7 times in the last 4 years. If you just look at the numbers from when we invested, so I'm sure it is a long march, and yet the company's made tremendous progress in the last 4 years.
And you've mentioned that you want to experiment going forward, and that's why no IPO quite yet. Can you give me any example of where Redfin's going from here? What are some of the things you're going to try out?
Well, I think the simplest thing is just that right now we represent home buyers and sellers, but they have other needs. They need title and escrow services. They need to borrow money. Eventually, we think that it makes sense for folks who love Redfin to get additional services from Redfin, and I just don't expect that when we launch that business that it'll be perfect for the customer or that it'll be insanely profitable. We're just going to screw around with it for a little while at a very small scale to make sure everybody who gives us a shot is glad that he did. And so that's going to be a fairly capital-intensive, long process, but believe me, it's worth it.
And last question here, you talk about making money and growing, rain or shine, and the real estate industry is obviously very, up and down, depending on where you are. In San Francisco, it's hot, but maybe in Phoenix, it's changing or something. How do you do that? Do you have any advice for a founder who's kind of in a space that's sensitive?
Well, we were asked this when we were raising money because there is a concern that the real estate market could turn south, and I always quoted Bane in Batman when he says, "You think the darkness is your friend, but I was born in the dark." I think going through a hard time, there's nothing else like it. It just breeds this intense discipline. So, if we had never been through a bad time, we could prepare for it in theory, but we grew this business through the absolute worst real estate downturn in U.S. history. And so if you can do that, you can do anything.
There's two other things on that point. So I think one of the reasons that the Redfin financing round was so successful was that there are two things. So one is that the company is so focused on the customer and the customer experience. And I see companies that raise money that come in and they have it like as a bullet point on a slide. Like we are very focused on like the customer experience. And it's very different to have it as a bullet on a slide than to actually like live it and like manifest it in lots of different ways. So if you read what Glenn writes to the company when he writes to the company, or what they talk about in their all hands meetings, if you see just the way that he obsesses about the details of the customer experience, if you see what the company measures and rewards, it's reinforced throughout the company. That's one thing. And the second thing is this is a business that is run very, very well operationally. They're very on top of the data and very on top of just the operations of the business. And so when investors were looking at the company in this round, they requested the last 4 to 6 board decks to see what the company actually shares with the board. And I think that seeing the level of detail and thoughtfulness with which these guys run the company, I think also was very inspiring for new investors. So how do you succeed in up and down markets? I think it's actually being very focused on the customer and also just being operationally excellent, which is something that this company is in spades.
Okay. Well, good news today. Thanks, Glenn and James, for talking to TechCrunch.
Thanks for having us.